The barracks were silent, save for the sound of boots scraping against the floor in perfect unison. Then the drill sergeant's voice ripped through the air like a whip. "Private Johnson, why the hell are you still standing there like a damn statue? Move it!" His words cut through the stillness like a blade. The entire room went dead quiet. Every eye was on Ty. Ty Johnson, newly arrived at Fort Jackson, had never felt smaller in his life. A quiet kid from a small town, all he wanted was to prove he belonged. But here he was, standing in front of a room full of strangers, his heart pounding in his chest as he felt every gaze on him. "I said move it!" Sergeant Miller barked again, stepping closer. The stench of cigarette smoke and sweat thickened his breath. The men around Ty shifted uneasily, but none of them spoke up. Ty's boots stayed rooted to the floor, though everything inside him screamed to move. His uniform felt too tight, his collar choking him. He could hear the snickers from the others in the back, their whispers slicing through the tension. "Look at Johnson. Can't even march right. Probably doesn't belong here." The words stung like cold water on a winter morning, sharp and biting. But Ty said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was the only way to survive. Sergeant Miller's face twisted in disgust as he glanced at Ty's boots, not quite lined up in perfect formation. "You think this is a damn joke, Johnson?" he sneered. "You're in the Army now. We don't have time for slackers or jokers. You're a disgrace to this uniform." The others, standing in stiff formation, shifted nervously, their eyes darting between Ty and their sergeant, hoping the wrath would pass over them. It didn't. Ty could feel the heat in his chest, the rush of humiliation creeping up his neck like fire. But he held it together, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wasn't going to let them see the pain. Not now. Not here. Not ever. "What's the matter with you, Private?" Miller spat, his face twisted in anger. "Don't you have any pride? Don't you respect the guys around you?" Ty's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the ground. His mind flashed back to the last words his father had told him before he'd left for boot camp. "No matter how tough it gets, son, hold your head high and stay true to who you are. Don't let anyone break you." Ty wanted to believe those words, to cling to the strength he knew was buried deep within him. But it felt so damn hard to stand tall when every word, every sneer, made him feel like he didn't belong. His father's medals, his father's legacy, those things seemed so far away right now. In this moment, it was just him against them, and right now, it felt like them were winning. Across the room, Private Harris stood with his head slightly turned, his eyes just a little too slow in looking away when their gazes met. Harris was the type to keep to himself, never too loud, never too quiet. Just there, but Ty could see the look in his eyes, the faintest flicker of sympathy. It was almost like Harris understood the weight of what Ty was going through. But Harris didn't speak up. In the military, you learned quickly that standing out was a dangerous game. Ty wasn't sure whether he'd be grateful for Harris's quiet solidarity or bitter that it couldn't be more. "Private Johnson, what the hell is your problem?" Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Ty's throat tightened. He felt like he was suffocating. Every ounce of his being wanted to scream, to lash out, to defend himself. But he didn't. He couldn't. Not here. Not with this many eyes watching. Instead, he stood at attention, his body rigid. "No problem, Sergeant," Ty replied, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was steady, strong. The sergeant scoffed, shaking his head. "A man of few words. We'll see how long that lasts, Johnson." He waved a dismissive hand and turned on his heel, his boots clicking against the floor as he moved on to the next soldier. Ty's breath left his body in a slow exhale, his shoulders sagging just slightly. No one said anything, but he could feel the weight of their silence. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to break him, and it wouldn't be the last. But every time they did, he was still standing, and that was all that mattered. As the rest of the squad went back to their drills, Ty stood in place for a long moment, staring down at his boots. He didn't dare look up. Not yet. His stomach churned, but he steadied himself. What he didn't know was that this moment, this humiliation, would be the last time he would let anyone think he was weak. Because something deep inside him was beginning to change. This wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. Later that night, As the lights in the barracks dimmed and the sounds of muffled voices settled into a quiet hum, Ty sat on his bunk, his hands shaking slightly as he tied his boots. The room was filled with the scent of sweat and stale air. The soldiers around him snored, but Ty's mind raced. He replayed the events of the day over and over in his mind. It wasn't just the words that cut, it was the look on their faces, the doubt in their eyes. They didn't see him as one of them. Not yet. He pulled his father's medal from under his shirt, holding it in his palm. The cold metal felt like a weight of expectation. He'd never wanted to be in the spotlight. He just wanted to be seen for who he was, someone worthy. But now it was clear that he had a choice to make. He could either keep hiding, keep letting the humiliation pile up, or he could finally start showing them who he really was. What will happen next? Ty thought as he placed the medal back against his chest. The answer wasn't clear yet, but Ty knew one thing. The next time Sergeant Miller called him out, Ty wasn't going to be the one who stood still. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The rain was coming down in sheets as Ty trudged through the muddy course, his boots sinking into the earth with every step. The whole platoon was soaked to the bone, but that didn't matter. Not to them. They were all soldiers now. They had to prove they could handle anything. But Ty wasn't sure he could keep going. His legs felt like lead, his chest tight with every breath. His uniform clung to him, cold and heavy, but there was no stopping. Not now. Not with everyone watching. "Come on, Johnson. Move those damn legs." Sergeant Miller's voice pierced through the storm like a knife, loud and cutting. Ty flinched but didn't slow down. He couldn't. Not in front of them. Not in front of Miller. The other soldiers were ahead of him, laughing and pushing each other forward. But Ty felt the weight of their gazes on his back. Every step was harder than the last, but the worst part was knowing they were all waiting for him to fail. Ty had tried, really tried. He had pushed himself harder than he ever had before. He stayed up late polishing boots, memorizing drills, running the extra mile when the others went to bed. He'd been mocked for it, laughed at for trying so hard, but he didn't care. He had to prove them wrong. He had to prove he wasn't just some kid who didn't belong here. The rain beat harder against his helmet as he struggled to keep up. His body screamed for rest, but he just gritted his teeth and kept moving. The others had finished the obstacle course long ago, and now it was just him and Miller, watching, judging. Miller's eyes never left him, the sneer on his face obvious even through the rain. Ty stumbled, catching his foot on a rock, but he caught himself. He couldn't fall. Not here, not now. His heart was pounding in his ears, but he didn't dare stop. If he did, they'd see him fail. "You think you're special, Johnson? You think a couple of push-ups and a smile will get you through this?" Miller barked, his voice dripping with contempt. Ty's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His mind flashed back to every time someone had told him he wasn't good enough. Every time they had laughed at him, but he couldn't let it break him. He gritted his teeth, taking another step, then another, pushing through the exhaustion, the pain. His eyes were locked on the finish line, but it felt like it was miles away. Sweat mixed with rain, and his muscles were on fire, but he refused to quit. He couldn't. He wouldn't. And then something unexpected happened. As he rounded the last corner, Ty's foot slipped, sending him crashing down into the mud. The force knocked the wind out of him, and he lay there for a moment, gasping. The rain pounded down harder now, soaking into his clothes. The mud was thick, sticking to his uniform, and for a split second, Ty wanted to stay there, wanted to give up. But then he heard it, the sound of Miller's voice, cold and cruel. "Pathetic. You can't even finish an obstacle course without falling on your ass." That was it, that one sentence, the moment that flipped something inside Ty. He pushed himself up, his hands shaking with anger, his chest heaving. He wiped the mud off his face, looking at the finish line just a few feet away. He didn't care if Miller was watching. He didn't care if the other soldiers thought he was weak. Ty wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for himself. With every ounce of strength he had left, Ty pushed forward. The mud tried to slow him down. The rain lashed against him, but he didn't stop. He was almost there. He could see the finish line. And then, with one final burst of energy, he crossed it. He collapsed on the ground, panting, his body shaking from the effort. The world felt like it was spinning around him, but he didn't care. He had done it. He had finished. For a moment, there was only silence. And then the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking toward him. Ty didn't have the strength to lift his head, but he didn't need to. It was Harris. "Damn, Johnson," Harris said quietly, his voice full of something Ty couldn't place. "You actually did it." Ty didn't respond. He didn't have to. Harris didn't say much, but Ty could see the respect in his eyes. That was enough. Harris had been the one person who hadn't mocked him, the one person who had seen past the jokes and the failures. "Let's get you up," Harris added, offering Ty a hand. Ty took it, letting Harris pull him to his feet. His legs felt like jelly, but the fire in his chest wasn't about to burn out. "You're not as bad as they say you are," Harris added with a grin, "but you still suck at running." Ty chuckled weakly, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, I'm getting better." "You just keep going," Harris said, his voice serious now. "That's the key. You keep going." Ty nodded, still catching his breath, but feeling something new stir inside him. Something different. He had kept going, and that made all the difference. The rest of the platoon was already in the chow hall, laughing and talking, but Ty stayed back for a moment, just taking it all in. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first stepped onto that course. The ridicule, the doubts, they didn't matter anymore. Not when he had crossed that finish line. But as Ty walked toward the chow hall, he could hear Sergeant Miller's voice behind him. "Don't get too comfortable, Johnson. You still have a long way to go." Ty didn't respond. Instead, he just kept walking. And for the first time since arriving, he felt something deep inside him shift. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, but he was damn sure going to finish this. And when it was all over, the people who had mocked him wouldn't have the last word. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The sun hadn't even fully risen, but Ty was already awake. His boots were lined up perfectly under his bed, his uniform pressed, his weapon cleaned. He had to prove himself every damn day. The others were still snoring, but he couldn't afford to sleep in. Every day felt like another test, another chance to be broken down, humiliated. But today he wasn't going to let that happen. He had gotten through the last hell week, but he wasn't sure if he could survive another round of Sergeant Miller's endless insults. He wouldn't make it. If he stayed the same, Ty had to change. The barracks smelled of sweat and iron, and the air was thick with the usual buzz of soldiers getting ready for another grueling day. As Ty laced up his boots, he glanced over at Harris, who was already sitting on his bunk, his back straight. They had barely spoken the night before, but Ty knew Harris wasn't like the others. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. As Ty walked into the mess hall, the usual tension hit him hard. The chatter, the clinking of trays, the loud laughter of the guys who had made it to the top of the hierarchy here. It all felt like a reminder that he didn't belong. The whispers started right away. "Here he comes, the rookie. Think he's some sort of soldier now," one of the guys snickered. Ty kept his head down, picking up his tray. He didn't need to hear it. He could feel it in his bones. Every single time he showed up, it was the same thing. He spotted Harris sitting near the back and made his way over, trying to ignore the comments from his fellow soldiers. But as he sat down, he could feel the eyes on him. The few moments of peace he had felt were slipping away fast. A harsh laugh cut through the air. "Hey, Johnson, you think you're going to be something special? You ain't shit, just like every other screw-up that comes through here," shouted Corporal Ramirez, leaning over with a grin that could break anyone. Ty clenched his jaw but didn't say a word. He had learned the hard way that standing up to Ramirez only made things worse. It wasn't the first time Ramirez had taunted him, but Ty had gotten better at ignoring it. At least that's what he told himself. But the words still stung. They always did. Ramirez wasn't done. "What's the matter, Johnson? You look like you're about to cry," he jeered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The others laughed, but this time it wasn't the same. There was something deeper in their laughter. They were getting ready to see him break. Harris shot Ty a look, but didn't say anything. Ty didn't expect him to. It wasn't Harris's fight after all. But that look, It was enough to let Ty know that there was one person who still saw him for more than just a target. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Ty didn't know what hurt more, Ramirez's words or the fact that the rest of them were too scared to speak up. They had no problem with tearing him down, but they couldn't lift him up. Later that morning, Ty found himself in the middle of a training exercise that felt like the worst kind of punishment. The drill involved crossing an obstacle course filled with tangled ropes, sharp turns, and mud pits that would swallow you whole. He had to do it with the full gear, full weight in front of the entire squad. The first few obstacles were tough, but Ty pushed through. His hands bled from the ropes, his boots slipping in the mud, but he kept moving forward. The others? They had finished and were waiting for him to mess up. They were standing around, watching, waiting, and Ty could feel it. He knew they were hoping he'd fail. They were praying he wouldn't make it. It was when he hit the final stretch that things started to go south. The rope swing. He wasn't fast enough. His hands slipped, his feet missed the mark, and before he knew it, he was face first in the mud. The gasps around him were loud enough to make his heart race. He had done everything to get here, to prove he was worthy, and in one moment, it all crumbled. "You're a disgrace, Johnson," Miller's voice bellowed from the sidelines. Ty's vision was blurry from the mud in his eyes, but he could still hear every word. "You don't deserve to wear that uniform." Ramirez's laugh echoed behind him. "Didn't think you'd make it. You're just dead weight out here." The sting of the words hit harder than the fall. Ty felt the anger building up inside him, but he didn't have the energy to lash out. He stood up, wiping the mud from his face. The squad was watching him, waiting for him to break, but he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Not this time. He wiped his hands on his pants and nodded at Miller. "I'll finish it," he said, though his voice was hoarse. But something inside him had changed. There was a fire burning, something more than just survival. Ty had spent weeks feeling like an outsider, like he wasn't enough. But this moment, this failure, it was the turning point. He wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, decide his worth. Not anymore. The rest of the course felt like a blur. His muscles were sore, his body begging for rest. But he kept moving. This time there was no stopping. The crowd of soldiers was quieter now. Maybe they were waiting for him to fail again, or maybe they were seeing something different. As Ty reached the final stretch, he could hear the jeers fading away. They were still there, but there was something else. Something that hadn't been there before. It was respect. Quiet respect. The kind that comes not from pity, but from witnessing someone who refuses to give up. Ty didn't look back. He crossed the finish line, his body barely able to hold itself up, but his heart was stronger than it had ever been. The course was behind him, and the soldiers around him were silent. The rest of the platoon wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking him. They were watching, and they were seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. But the real shock came when Sergeant Miller stepped forward. Ty was expecting the usual punishment, the usual cold words. Instead, Miller nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Private Johnson," he said, his voice steady but with a trace of something else. "You're not bad for a rookie, but don't get too comfortable." Ty stood there, chest heaving, soaked to the bone, but for the first time, he felt like he had earned something. Not just respect, but his place in this unit. Later that night, Harris approached him after the lights had dimmed in the barracks. There was no crowd, no noise, just the quiet of the two of them sitting together in the dark. "You did good, Johnson," Harris said, his voice low but full of meaning. Ty nodded, his mind racing. "Not good enough," he muttered, but there was a hint of pride in his voice. Harris grinned, nudging him lightly. "Yeah, well, you'll get there. Just keep going." And Ty realized that maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to believe it. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. Ty's hands were shaking as he stood at the back of the formation, waiting for Sergeant Miller to speak. The rain had stopped, but the cold still bit through his uniform, and the mud clung to his boots like a constant reminder of how far he had come, or rather, how far he thought he had come. The training exercises had gotten tougher, but Ty had pushed through, determined not to show weakness. He had earned a bit of respect, even from Ramirez, who had stopped the constant taunting. But that didn't mean everything was fine. It never was in this place. "Private Johnson," Miller's voice rang out, as sharp as ever. Ty straightened, bracing for the worst. The last time Miller called his name like that, it was to humiliate him in front of the whole platoon. This time, though, it was different. Ty wasn't sure how, but he could feel it in the air. Miller walked down the row, eyes scanning each soldier like he was looking for something to break. "You think you've got what it takes?" He barked at Ty, his voice thick with challenge. The other soldiers looked on, waiting. Ty's heart raced, his throat tight with the usual anxiety. But he couldn't back down now, not after everything. "Yes, Sergeant," Ty replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Miller's eyes narrowed, and for a second, Ty thought he might get one of those speeches again, the kind that made him feel smaller than he already was. But then Miller did something unexpected, something Ty would remember for the rest of his life. "You're going to lead the next exercise, Johnson." The words hung in the air like an explosion. Every soldier's head snapped in his direction, disbelief written across their faces. Ty's heart skipped a beat. Lead. He'd barely been able to keep up, let alone take charge. But Miller's eyes were locked on him, steady and unyielding. "I said, you're going to lead the next drill," Miller repeated, his voice cold. "Don't fuck this up." Ty couldn't breathe. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears. Lead. He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't even sure he knew how, but he couldn't back down, not now. "All right, you're the man. Get to it," Miller snapped, pushing Ty toward the front. The other soldiers stood there silent, watching. Ty felt their eyes like daggers in his back, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he did, he'd crumble. Instead, he took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The pressure was suffocating, but he couldn't back out. He had to lead this drill, and he had to do it right. The obstacle course ahead seemed to stretch for miles. It was a brutal challenge, the kind that had humbled even the best of the best. Ty's mind raced. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. He was out of his depth, standing in front of a platoon of soldiers who had been here longer, had seen more, and knew more than he ever would. And yet here he was, holding the reins. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried through the quiet tension. "Let's get this done. Follow my lead, and we'll make it through." The words didn't sound as strong as he'd hoped. There was doubt in his voice, doubt in the way he held his rifle, but it was too late to change it now. He had to move forward. Ty gestured for the first soldier to take their turn, his hands still trembling, but his mind slowly finding a rhythm. One by one, the soldiers started to follow his lead. It was like pulling teeth. Every soldier seemed to hesitate, looking for an excuse to not give him their full attention. But Ty couldn't stop. He kept pushing forward, directing them with shaky confidence, trying not to show that inside he was terrified. But slowly, just slowly, something started to click. He began to find his stride, his voice getting stronger as he barked commands and called out instructions. He started moving with a purpose, not as a rookie trying to prove he was worthy, but as a leader, standing at the front, not hiding behind anyone. Ramirez, who had been eyeing him with skepticism, finally stepped up next. But this time something was different. He didn't speak. He didn't crack a joke. He just nodded and took his place, following Ty's orders without hesitation. The soldiers behind him mirrored the same quiet respect. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ty's heart was still pounding, but for the first time since he'd gotten here, he felt like he had control. This was his moment. But then the unthinkable happened. As the final soldier, Private Douglas, took his turn across the course, the unexpected occurred. The rope bridge, the one Ty had struggled with so many times, snapped under Douglas's weight. The entire obstacle collapsed in a heap of wood and tangled ropes. There was a split second of silence before chaos erupted. "Shit!" Miller shouted, rushing forward, followed by the rest of the platoon. Ty's mind went into overdrive. He had to do something. He wasn't the best. He wasn't even close. But he was the one in charge now. His stomach twisted as he ran toward the wreckage. Douglas was lying on the ground, clutching his arm. Ty didn't wait. He knelt beside him, checking for any sign of serious injury. "You okay?" Ty asked, his voice rough but steady. I think I'm all right. Just my arm," Douglas muttered, his face pale, but his breathing steady. Ty turned to Miller, who was now standing at the edge of the wreckage, fists clenched. He was waiting for Ty to give the orders, to fix the mess that had happened. "Get him to the medic," Ty said, his voice clear, though his heart was hammering in his chest. Miller froze for a second, like he was waiting for something. Then something shifted. Miller didn't bark an order. He didn't look to anyone else. He stepped back, finally nodding at Tinoma. "You heard him. Get moving." Ty watched as the medics arrived and took Douglas away. The rest of the platoon stood quietly, their eyes on him. For the first time, Ty felt the weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. It wasn't a crown. It wasn't easy, but it was his. Later, as the platoon stood in formation for the final inspection, Ty noticed the difference in the room. They weren't laughing. They weren't whispering behind his back. They were watching him, but now it was with a kind of respect, the kind that came from seeing him step up when it mattered. Sergeant Miller gave him a quick nod before walking away. No words exchanged. But that nod, it spoke volumes. Ty had done something today. He had shown them who he really was. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was a victory. And Ty knew deep down this was only the beginning. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The barracks were quieter than usual that night. Ty sat on his bunk, the faint sound of rain hitting the window, the only thing breaking the stillness. He hadn't been able to shake the events of the last few weeks. How far he'd come, how much he'd changed, how much the others had started to see him differently. It was all starting to sink in, and for the first time, he let himself feel it. He wasn't just the guy getting mocked anymore. He wasn't the weak link, but still doubts crept in. He was still the outsider in many ways. He could see it in the way the others kept their distance, in the way their eyes flicked toward him when they thought he wasn't looking. He knew they respected him now, but respect and acceptance were two different things. And acceptance, true acceptance, felt like it was still just out of reach. "Johnson," a voice said from across the room. Ty turned to see Harris standing in the doorway, holding a tray of food. Harris had been the only one who had ever really stood by him, and Ty appreciated it more than he could say. But tonight, Harris didn't look like he was here just to share a meal. "What's up, Harris?" Ty asked, glancing down at his half-empty tray. Harris didn't sit down. He was leaning against the doorframe, looking hesitant, like he was about to say something important. "Look, man," Harris began, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't know how to say this, but you might want to watch your back." Ty raised an eyebrow, confusion, flickering in his eyes. "Watch my back? What the hell are you talking about?" "I've been hearing stuff," Harris said, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Ramirez, Miller, they're not done with you. They're trying to break you down again, Johnson. Not just the regular shit, something bigger this time." Ty felt a cold rush hit his chest. He had thought it was over. The ridicule, the mockery, the struggle. But hearing Harris say that made it all feel too real. He stood up, suddenly on edge. "What do you mean, something bigger? What are they planning?" Harris looked around again before speaking more urgently. "I overheard Miller talking to Ramirez after the last exercise. They were planning to set you up during the next drill. They want to see you fail, Ty. They're not going to let you keep this leader role." Ty's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when he was starting to feel like he belonged. "I don't get it," Ty said, his voice low but full of frustration. "What the hell is their problem? Why can't they just leave me alone?" Harris sighed. "Because you're not like the rest of us, man. You don't fit their mold. And that scares them. They want to see you fall, and when you do, they'll be right there, waiting to say, 'I told you so.' It's always been like that." Ty clenched his fists, feeling that familiar fire build up inside him. He had worked too damn hard to be pushed back down. He wasn't going to let them do this to him. Not now, not after everything. "Thanks for telling me," Ty said, the words coming out sharper than he'd intended. "I'll handle it." Harris nodded, but there was a look of concern in his eyes. Just be careful, all right? You've come this far. Don't let them take it all away. Ty watched as Harris turned and left, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. His mind was a mess of thoughts, but one thing stood clear. He couldn't back down. Not this time. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everything he had earned, everything he had worked for. The next morning, the drill was brutal. They had to navigate through a course full of obstacles that seemed designed to break them down. Ty's squad was lined up, all of them looking at him, waiting for him to take charge. Ramirez was smirking from the back of the line, and Miller stood with his arms crossed, watching closely. Ty stepped up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, the pressure building with each passing second. All right, listen up, Ty barked, his voice loud and steady, surprising even himself. We're getting through this. No shortcuts, no excuses. Follow my lead. The others moved into position, and Ty felt something shift. There was no room for doubt now. The drill began, and Ty led the way, pushing through the obstacles with a confidence he hadn't had before. But as they approached the final challenge, the rope bridge that had taken out so many before, Ty noticed something. The ropes were frayed. The platform looked weak, almost unstable. Ty's stomach twisted. He didn't have time to think about it. He had to keep moving, keep the momentum going. But just as he took his first step onto the bridge, he heard it. A snap. The rope broke. Ty's heart jumped into his throat. He reached out instinctively, his hand grasping for the nearest support. But it was too late. He was falling, and everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The world around him tilted, the ground rushing up to meet him. And then, nothing. The impact wasn't as bad as he'd expected. The mud softened the fall, but the wind had been knocked out of him, and for a moment he just lay there, gasping for air. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. Then Miller's voice cut through the stillness, but it wasn't the usual scorn or mockery. Johnson, he said, his voice low. You all right? Ty nodded, still trying to catch his breath. But what happened next stunned him. Miller, who had never once shown any sign of compassion, walked over and offered Ty his hand. Ty hesitated for a moment, but then took it, letting Miller pull him up. You're all right, Miller said, almost gruffly. Get back up and finish this. You lead us now. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Ty didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He had earned his place not by proving the others wrong, but by showing them who he really was. He wasn't perfect, but he was here, and that was enough. As Ty stepped back onto the course, he felt the weight of his journey settle over him. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about showing everyone, including himself, that he had the strength to keep moving forward, no matter what. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The wind howled as Ty stood beneath the American flag, the colors rippling in the breeze above him. The sounds of the bass seemed distant, almost like they were from another world. His chest swelled with a quiet pride, not the kind born from words or accolades, but the kind earned through sweat, grit, and countless moments when he could have fallen, but chose to rise instead. Around him, his fellow soldiers stood at attention, their eyes steady and respectful. Some had been his critics, others his silent supporters. But today, they all stood in unspoken unity. It wasn't about victory. It was about respect, the kind that you couldn't fake, the kind you earned. Sergeant Miller walked past him, his usual harshness replaced with a single nod, an acknowledgement that said everything without saying a word. Ty felt the weight of it. It wasn't just about surviving the tests, the insults, the endless drills. It was about proving that, despite everything, he could stand with his head high and hold his ground. What didn't kill him had made him stronger, as it often does. In life and in the military, actions speak louder than words. It's not the medals you wear or the titles you claim. It's what you do when no one's watching, what you stand for when it's easier to turn away. Ty had learned that the hard way. He had been knocked down, humiliated, and ignored. But in the end, he found the strength to rise and lead, not by commanding, but by earning the right to be there. The lesson is simple. Honor isn't something given to you. It's something you build every day. It's about brotherhood, standing shoulder to shoulder, lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. It's about having the courage to speak when silence would be easier, and the resilience to keep fighting, even when the odds are stacked against you. If this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like the video to show your support and subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the strength in us all. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and remember that we rise together.